Howdy everyone, and welcome to the cerealgeekTV YouTube channel. My name is James Eatock, and today I present to you something special. Last year I featured a lengthy 6-part interview with storyboard artist and writer Robert Lamb. I've known Rob since 1998 and he's always spoken very highly of the Filmation storyboard department, especially Vic Dal Chele, who was also the best man at Rob's wedding. Vic Dal Chele has worked in the animation industry from 1981 until, well, today. He's worked at Filmation, Marvel Productions, Geek, Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers, Disney, the list goes on. I've known Vic for over a decade now and he's an incredibly humble gentleman. I thought it would be fascinating for fans of this channel and animation in general to hear Vic talk about his time in the industry. This is the second part of the interview. Enjoy!
So I'm going to talk some more about not my first year in the business, but basically how it was working at Filmation on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I was one of the first, if not the first, storyboard artist hired, and that's because I scored the highest on the He-Man storyboard test. But a lot of comrades that I had from my first season on Hero High and Shazam were coming back as well. Bob Forward, Mike Swanigan, Don Manuel, Rob Lamb, and a few others who will come to me maybe in a few minutes as to who they are that were there 2 years before. I think there was also Steve Hickner and Warren Greenwood and Chris Jenkins had come or were back on staff for storyboards at Filmation at the start of He-Man. I think one of the things that happened before the scripts were ready was that they gave me work to do cleaning up rotoscoping. And what the problem was is that they went out and filmed people that were bodybuilders, male and female. I guess they picked a person to be He-Man and a person to be Teela. And they were, good physical specimens for that type of figure. But they were not of heroic proportions. It's hard to tell you exactly what that is unless you know something about how tall figures are. Usually you hear they're eight heads tall. Sometimes if you want it to be statuesque, more heroic, they're 8.5 to 9 heads tall. But most people are 7.5 heads tall. And so those guys were muscle bound. They were, but they were still 7.5 heads tall. And you had to basically reduce the size of their head to make them more heroic in proportion. So a lot of people were tracing the rotoscope directly, and we had 7.5 head tall He-Mans and the 7.5 head tall Teelas. So I think they made the adjustment finally and kind of worked it in to where most of the stuff was at least 8 heads tall. And I remember the first scripts hit while I was in the middle of a down shot of He-Man running into scene, stopping, swinging his sword at the enemy, and then running off. And I only got partially the way through it, and somebody else took it and finished it. But what happened was that some kind of strange metamorphosis happens when he runs in and stops and starts to turn. His body gets bigger, and it looks like his head gets smaller, but only it doesn't get smaller just because the body's getting bigger. So I guess that person's formula was to grow the body instead of shrinking the head. So there's that scene that's always bothered me. because whenever I see it, I kind of cringe and go, I should have not let them take me off of this one scene before I was done. Well, let me tell you a little bit about how Filmation did storyboards as opposed to the other studios of the day and up until today. Most shows at other studios, in fact, I think all shows at other studios, at least for half-hour television, is usually divided up between 3 or possibly 4 board artists. Each are given between 7 to 10 pages of script to board, and they're given at I guess the shortest time I've seen, which is not typical. The shortest time is 4 weeks to do their section, and usually it's 5 and sometimes 6 weeks to board 1/3 of a show. But at Filmation, they gave 1 script to 1 board artist, and they gave them 5 weeks to do the entire show. Now, this was a pretty daunting task, but most of the board artists successfully met their deadlines. And that really is telling, because there was so much research and use of Xerox machines, because there certainly weren't any kind of PCs at the time, computers, to work on, to draw on. Everything had to be done on paper. And your stock scenes of the characters, you had to Xerox, cut them out and paste them onto your board panels, which is, when you think 30% of a storyboard approximately would be stock and same as, that's a lot of Xeroxing and cutting and pasting to do, besides drawing new panels in a 5-week period of time. So after I was finished or pulled off of rotoscoping to start doing storyboards on the He-Man series, I believe the first one that I did was Like Father, Like Daughter. And surprisingly, I actually boarded the episodes in numerical order. If I can explain a little, the scripts are assigned or approved and they go into writing first drafts, but they all are given a number, so that number stays with the script. So what happens is that sometimes a script, let's say script 12, is delayed because it's having rewrites or other problems that they're waiting for approvals on. So they have to give a script to go into production, but 12 is delayed and 13 is ready to go. So they move that up and they give out 13 before 12. So if I go by the script numbers, the order that I did episodes in is Like Father, Like Daughter, Creatures from the Tar Swamp, Orko's Favorite Uncle, The Mystery of Many-Faces, and finishing up with Pawns of the Game Master. And that one was split between Tom T and I. He did the first half of that episode and I did the last half of that episode. And that was pretty much, I think pretty much all I did in that first season. Well, Like Father, Like Daughter was the first episode I storyboarded. And I recently watched the episode to refresh my memory because, well, it's been more than 40 years since I boarded that episode. And probably 30 since I last saw it. I sure wish I had something to reference to, because I'm 95% okay with that. More than not, 95% of it is probably exactly the way I boarded it. But there are shots where I look at it and I go, geez, I wouldn't have done it like that. And, maybe I'm looking at it with 40 years of experience in between. Okay, the next episode that I worked on was the episode entitled Creatures from the Tar Swamp. And this was the second episode I boarded, and a pivotal one for my career as a storyboard artist in animation. And this episode stars royal cousin Lady Edwina. And it was really interesting acting out such a snobby character, and also dealing with Orko's crush on her. I mean, really, he was just totally love-struck with Lady Edwina. I felt really fortunate to be able to storyboard a flashback to Prince Adam as a young boy, lost in the tar swamp with Cringer. I'm not sure, but this might have been the first script that showed him at that age. I also enjoyed that in this small sequence there was no stock created for it, so I could just board setups without the restriction of tailoring the shots to the stock setups. I really thought the location design for the tar swamp was a cut above some of the other locations in Eternia. And it was fun to depict Orko as a hero saving the life of young Prince Adam. And an unusual aspect of the story is that He-Man doesn't show up until almost halfway through the episode. He really took a secondary role in this one and let Orko become the hero and the center and focus of this story. So it was a different one, and I'm glad I got to work on it. What happened was that after I started storyboarding for He-Man, I'd done 2 episodes, and each of those episodes I got a pink slip for. The board supervisor just didn't like what I was doing, and he had written me up twice, and he was basically saying to me that I was going to be fired off of the show. Basically, he told me, I had nothing to be ashamed about, that I shouldn't feel bad, that I tried my best, and can go home and say I gave it my best shot and move on. He kind of didn't understand that I didn't begin with He-Man. I already had worked on a season of Filmation shows successfully. Well, whatever his reasons were, he just didn't care for what I was turning in. So somewhere in that last day or so I was going to be working, word got to Hal Sutherland that I was going to be let go. And Hal said something, I'm sort of paraphrasing, something doesn't make sense to him because I was the guy who scored the best and the highest on the storyboard test. So he went to the supervisor and said, I hear, you're going to be letting Vic go. And, he said yes. And he said, well, let me see what he's been doing, because, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So he took the boards. I know he took Creatures from the Tar Swamp home overnight, and he looked at it, and he came back to the board supervisor and basically told him, I don't know what the problem is here. I've looked at the board, and this guy's saving your ass. So basically, he put his arm of protection around me and wouldn't allow me to be fired. That was a crucial point for me. And I'll always be grateful to Hal Sutherland for what he did for me.
To be continued.